walls made of wood and stone and various materials? Of the objects which are being carried in like manner, they would only see the shadows.
Emily Pottist wrote about this parable's relevance to both simulation theory and other aspects of digital communications and miscommunications.
It's a very cinematic metaphor, and I just love that, how, that sort of imagination of how film affects us. And just like there's like that lossiness between what is really happening and what perception shows us, there's sort of lossiness between what media shows us and what the real world outside of that media representation is. So now it's not just what their senses decide to show them, it's what the media decides to show them.
And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
Let's go back to Hindu myths. You find these incredible myths of, like, the king's going along and stops for a well, and he drinks, and then he goes and he has a whole other existence, a whole other life, and then pop, he comes back in, and they'll even go have worlds within worlds within worlds. So you have this structure of worlds within worlds, and once you have that, it undermines the primary world.
It really kind of crystallized for me when I started observing the experience of the villager in Minecraft. He's a massively simplified version of us. He has free will. He moves about the space as he sees fit. Well, the interesting thing, though, is for me what it was with the villager is, what does he do when you, the avatar, come down into the game of Minecraft? And you inhabit your avatar in Minecraft and you descend to Earth. What does the villager do when you encounter him? He looks at you, He looks at you as if you are the same as him. Of course, you're not, because you are being controlled by an intelligent higher power.
It'd be hilarious if Elon Musk was a player character. And he just comes into the games like, hey, you guys know, we're simulated.
This could be some simulation.
It could. Do you entertain that?
But then he gets to log off, go back to our fights or heaven or whatever, and laugh with his weird extra dimensional friends that, hey, I was just playing around with that simulation again today. I keep dropping them hints, but no one's picking it up.
But it's interesting because, for me, the villager speaks to, there are a few different levels of what, being raised in a Christian faith I would call God. There's the God who made the world, and then there's the avatar who's descending in front of you, and they're different, because the God who made the world is not the person who's in front of you. We don't get to see that. We don't get to see the creator of the game. To extend this metaphor to perhaps ridiculous lengths, 1 minute, a pixel on your screen will be representing a flower, and it is that flower. And then the next minute, a villager will walk in, and that pixel represents him. That pixel is part of him. It doesn't take much to think about, like, well, if I just extrapolate that to 3 dimensions, it's the same as atoms and cells. One year, this cell is part of me, and then tomorrow it'll flake off and it'll be part of something else, and every 7 years our cells replace themselves anyway.
Artist Chris Ware was so struck by the implications of Minecraft that he created this cover illustration for The New Yorker.
Video game itself captures this sort of sense of, I don't know, more than anything, just like death. Whenever I play it with my daughter, I feel like we're dead and we're flying around looking at the world or something. It's the only experience I've had that kind of closely approximates what I imagine a disembodied consciousness might experience or something. I don't know how else to really put it. We build these peculiar sculptures. She built giant, is a relative term when you're talking digitally and unreality, but giant sculptures of myself and my wife amidst kind of like golden farmhouses, and that then would go underground, and train lines or minecart lines that would go underground and connect between the landscape that kind of pre-existed. But now she's 14, so she's kind of passed beyond, but now she's in this sort of Baroque phase where she and some of her friends now have gone back to Minecraft and are now looking at their worlds that they made in their pre-adolescence and kind of revisiting them and listening. the music again and getting all tearful. So it's like 14-year-old nostalgia for a lost world of innocence or something. I guess when she's 40 and I'm 85 or whatever, and download it onto a flash drive, we can continue to visit.
My relationship with the United States has always been a very bad one. It has always seemed to me that I was about to be arrested by the American police for some obscure reason. And perhaps that's because of reading Kafka's The Trial. That influenced me very much, where someone is arrested for a crime and he's never told what crime he's committed.
When I was a kid, and one of the things that I really keyed into was adults at the time would repeat things over and over again. For instance, Newsweek magazine, my dad used to get it all the time. And we'd be sitting around the dinner table, and he'd say, well, and then he'd say, word for word, a sentence that was read from the Newsweek magazine. So it was like the magazine programmed him to say that thing. This wasn't an original thought that he had. And that's really where it started, I guess. In my, early childhood, the concept that the people that I was dealing with I used the term chemical robots at the time, but the concept that they weren't actually conscious. They had these repeated behaviors that they would do over and over again.
In his paper, Nick Bostrom defined a simulation of the entire mental history of mankind as an ancestor simulation when estimating the amount of computing power one might need.
Does the idea of ancestor simulations suggest that we're retracing the steps of the genuine society that created the simulation?
Well, that's one possibility. There could also be all kinds of variations, ranging from complete fantasy worlds that bear no resemblance to anything that existed in physical reality to variations of history. All of that is conceptually possible. But an ancestor simulation that I talk about in the paper, which is to consider the type of simulation where the simulators would be creating very detailed simulations of people like their historical predecessors. Maybe not exactly the same people, but the same kind of people.
Back when I was 9 or 10, I used to joke about with my brothers and sister that people would just go home and just sit down and stare at walls when no one was watching. They would just go home and T-pose effectively in their private spaces. Seeing because they would just deactivate their programming, I guess. I used to joke about that, but that idea ran with me a lot when I was older. It kind of became a little horrifying. These people I'd be talking to, since nobody was watching, the program would stop working.
Does not assume that all the details of our world would be simulated to perfect subatomic precision all the time. And indeed, that kind of simulation might well be completely intractable. obviously depends on the kind of compute power available in the basement simulator. If they have infinitely fast computers, sure. But no, the idea rather is that you would be able to create a simulation capturing only enough that to the simulated creatures they couldn't tell the difference. And that would involve some pretty clever footwork on behalf of the simulators, that they would be able, for example, to fill in detail in a particular part of reality when we are paying attention, but then not simulating all of those details all the time.
I'm occupying maybe 20 square feet.
And yet there's a whole world that exists because I know about it, just here in my brain.
I worked with a company for a little while that launched what is now a very popular app that is an interactive fiction app. You know, there's an element of, well, it's just like writing and choose your own adventure, but what became swiftly obvious to me how simple some of our own decision making is from a coding perspective.
A popular recent Reddit AMA was with a user who wrote, "I am a real-life non-player character."
All right, we're all good. So, a NPC is a non-player character that you will normally see in a video game. They're usually the people that aren't controlled by the player of the video game. They are the characters that were kind of programmed in there. It's kind of like talking to a person in real life, but they only have a set amount of things that they can say. Hey, buddy! Cat in there or what? And you only have a specific lines that you can say back to it in response.
I can only imagine if I was really a gamer, how I would experience social interaction. But even as a non-game player, I sometimes find myself, dealing with non-player characters.
I work at a grocery store, and I have a specific list of things that I need to accomplish when greeting a customer and checking out their items. And because of that, it just made logical sense that I create kind of a mental script that I go through with each customer.
When this stimuli happens to him, generally speaking, he reacts in this way. It's not terribly different from the code that tells the chickens of Minecraft what to do, or the turtles in Mario Brothers, or the mosquitoes of Maine. They're all kind of operating on the same principles. If this, then that. If not, then don't. It's not too much of a leap to think that consciousness may mean we are being inhabited by some sort of player type intelligence.
The reason everyone loves to be like, oh, small world, is because it is actually, there just isn't enough processing power to render 7 billion consciousnesses. There are not 7 billion consciousnesses. Yeah, there might be 7 billion in the general algorithm of how many people are on Earth, but when you start talking to people, there's probably like a couple 100,000 AIs that are serving as the substrate for the, people experience that everyone's having on Earth. So when you find that the same people are 6 degrees of separation, it's not a surprise at all. In fact, it's a flaw in the system. And that's just a limit of the actual processing power of the machine that the sim's running on.
Well, have you ever encountered a non-player character?
I mean, you encounter them all the time when you're walking down the street and you don't interact with people. Like, it's just like in a video game. There's much less processing power being attributed to the automatons. But once you start interacting, then something has to actually serve as the intelligence behind that so-called, human.
Society is rapidly secularizing. Religion is completely falling apart. And there's elements of that are wonderful. I think religion plays an overly restrictive role in people's lives too often. certainly the religion I was raised in does. But I do know people from my childhood in a fairly evangelical Christian world who, wanted to, would have committed violent acts if only God, if only God wouldn't punish them for it. Now, why it takes God to do that as opposed to one's own honor and self-worth and love for the neighbor, I don't know, but that was the case, right? I believe that this thought that we're living in a simulation, I think that is going to just increase in popularity. And for people who are content to see both sides of an argument and that doesn't split our heads into, for people who are content to see shades of gray, I think that's a fine idea, because we don't, it doesn't change anything about my daily life necessarily, and it shouldn't. So if I'm a simulation, okay. So if I was created by a creator God, okay. So if I'm a random sparking of cells, okay, fine. It doesn't change much about how I am living day to day. But there's a lot of people with very absolutist mindsets, and I think once you tell them, hey, you're a simulation, the nihilistic side of humanity, their first reaction will be then, well, it doesn't matter what I do to anyone else, because I know that I'm real and I feel it, but if there's no proof that they're real, then what's the point of law? The point of all this,
I do honestly think there is a certain degree of inability to separate real world from digital realities when you have something like the shooter in New Zealand live streaming what he's doing and going after people like he's in a first-person shooter, and going after the people who like Muslims or people shoot up synagogues, going after someone who is constructed as an other by the media that they consume.
We must meet the threat with our valor, our blood, indeed with our very lives, to ensure that human civilization, not insect, dominates this galaxy now and always.
However, you end up sort of in that place where everyone you shoot at just kind of disappears and they were all pod people, and they weren't real, or the NPC meme, you get into a place where you kind of treat reality like these are digital, disposable bombs.
And so one guy might plug in, he's Kanye West. One person might plug in, he's, instead of doing that, he's Michael Phelps. They plug in and they play and they stay at the top level in some way that they can, doing different exploits. But then you have people who log in. They used to play a lot and they were really good, but then they unplugged and they didn't come back for years and years. And so the reflection in our reality would be a celebrity that is who was really good and then just fell from grace and never really came back. I can't name a specific celebrity here, plus I don't want to throw that into your film. Anyway, so they would do something. They would go totally they'd be going straight, and all of a sudden they'll be doing something that's totally perpendicular to their normal behavior patterns. Because in a video game, you're doing it well. Then all of a sudden you just get bored and you start doing something totally different. And I've done that myself in video. I've been playing Grand Theft Auto, and you have millions and millions of dollars, and all of a sudden it's like, yeah, okay, I think I'm gonna hold up in this apartment building to see how many police I can get to try to kill me. They kind of just go for something crazy.
I once said to my uncle, well, what if this is all fake? What if none of this is real? And he said, well, then what's to keep me from going door to door just shooting people in the head? Or what's to keep me from, shooting you? And it always struck me as being, is that what you want to do? Is the only thing keeping you from doing that the fact that the world is real and there are consequences?
Did you see that video of the gentleman on the West Coast, who he hijacked a commercial air flight that was empty. It was just him on board, and he had no training whatsoever. And he started just flying